Great morning, great afternoon, great evening, wherever this conversation finds you. I am Travis Gray. This is Gray Transforms. Today we are blessed with another great guest, Tim Freke. This is the correct pronunciation of his name. I know that if there's any reason that you guys resonate with the Gray Transforms, it's because we're all freaks. So, Tim Freke is an author of 35 books, the latest books being Deep Awake and Soul Story, and he is a pioneering philosopher who developed Unividualism, which combines evolutionary science and spirituality. Tim, I must tell you that my father, his name is also Tim, so I'm looking forward to receiving some fatherly philosophy from you that I never got from my own father. How are you, Tim?
Yeah, I'm good. It's looking forward to having a conversation, Travis.
Awesome. So let's introduce the people to Tim. So you are a philosopher. You've written 35 books. I applaud you for that feat. That is really incredible that you've been able to be so generative in your work, in your philosophy. I am interested in the unividualism and how that came about. But how did you get started in being a philosopher and taking this route in your life?
Well, I think I got started by being a philosopher. That I woke up every day when I was young, and I was alive, and I had no idea why, and it felt very significant. And I can remember having a conversation. You mentioned your father. I can remember having a conversation with my father when I was very young, maybe 9 years old or something like that, 10 or something, walking with him, with our dog, and me asking, like, what is this we're in? And it's funny because I have such a distinct memory. I can remember him saying, Timothy, greater men than you and I have asked these questions and have found no answer. And I can remember with that incredible arrogance of being young, it just felt like, that's crazy. The question this big, there must be a way to know what it is. Why else would I be here experiencing it? So I think it goes back to those very young experiences. And then when I was about 12, also very young, I had my first, what I think of now as deep awake experience, where I suddenly found myself in an altered state, in a state of, I would say now, not then, of communion with the universe, and it made a huge impression on me. And it felt like, oh, this is the thing I need to explore to understand what the experience of being alive is. And all sorts of crazy ways, I've been doing that ever since. And all of the books have come either about writing about how other people have come to see that. My initial books, I would say, they're mostly within the kind of perennial philosophy mold. They're like looking at all the different my first book, you've got the Tao Te Ching behind you. My first book was the Tao Te Ching. In fact, the black and white one you have behind the other one was one that I read as a teenager and made a massive impression on me. I mean, just a
Yeah.
hugely important book. So that's a long time ago now. So all of that process. So looking at like these are other people that have had a similar experience, having similar experiences to what I'm exploring, and what have they made of it? And then from that, looking at all these different traditions, we had a kind of bestseller which moved things on with the Christian tradition, and then my more recent work has been like, okay, so actually what impressed me about these people that I was studying and writing about was that all of them actually moved on our understanding for their own time. That's why I know who their names, because they didn't just repeat things. They actually whether we're talking about, mythical figures or literal figures, they're still doing that. And someone's doing that. And that's when it started really becoming central to me, say 20 years ago, and more in the last 10, 15 years. What needs to evolve now? How does spirituality, this thing I've been engaged with all my life, where does it need to go for the 21st century?
Yeah, that's amazing and so right in alignment with where the field of transpersonal psychology has been since the 70s. They've been interested in the formation of transpersonal psychology. It's been about the moving forward these ideas, integrating the Eastern wisdom with the Western science, and figuring out a way to communicate that to others. But they've been kind of like stuck in their own science and academic kind of container in some sense, and so the branding hasn't been great to get that out to other people. But I really appreciate the what you are saying about these, the forefathers of the many spiritual traditions. These individuals have been, they were never they Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was communicating this experience and this idea through him, and to others, and it was experienced by others. The way that he was articulating the truths that he was experiencing, and the Buddha and all of these people as examples of pushing that forward is really beautiful. So, what is the unividualism? What is that concept?
That's when I finally decided I needed to give what I was doing a name. Partly because then it's easier for people to go, "What is it?" Unividualism, because it's got a name, and they can, people can criticize it, people can support it, but you make it a thing. Because I wanted to give it an identity. And the reason I chose that word is because central to what I'm exploring is the idea that the awakening to a state of oneness with the universe is the leading edge of a process of evolution that's got us here, 14 billion years of it, that's got us here. And that we need to understand awakening not as awakening from the world, from those traditions like you get in India and the East of, oh, this is a mistake, or this is an illusion, this is somewhere where you've become trapped, you're lost in identification with your individuality, with the ego, that's a bad thing, get away from yourself, get away from your feelings, get away from your thoughts, get away from everything that makes you human, your relationships, everything, and get back to that pure state of being detached presence, or whatever, the Atman, or whatever name that's particularly given. And my having explored that in some depth and gone with that for some years when I was younger, it felt like, no, I don't think that's right. I think it's the opposite. I think actually we've seen the evolution of individuality through these 14 billion years, and it's our individuality which is a foundation through which we wake up to realize that the universe is a unity, and that we're arising as an aspect of it, and that Tim is that oneness as Tim in relationship to it all, and oh, look, there's Travis, he's that oneness as Travis in relationship with it all. So it's turning that on its head, and so I wanted a word to describe that. So the idea of a unividual as the next step for the individual, and culturally, what I've lived through, and certainly steadily actually, this increase in individuality, massive increase in individuality. Most of the political changes that have been positive have been about the individual. And my feeling is, and that's been good, but there's also some dark sides to it too. And that the next step in this evolutionary process, not just for spirituality, but actually culturally, for human beings, is to move towards being what I was calling unividuals. And what I'm developing is a comprehensive philosophy to account for the nature of reality, how science and spirituality link, one of the things you mentioned, but that can support this movement towards finding our unividuality.
Interesting. I'm thinking of several different things. It was interesting that right at the beginning you said that you needed to give this philosophy an identifier, and the identity itself seems to me like I had seen, like I said, I did some background, just natural research for any guest that comes on, and with great respect to you and your work is really incredible. I had watched some of this debate that you were having with another person. I think that was a popular YouTube video that had come on. I had seen your TED Talk and things like this as well, but this debate that was coming on, you spoke about a book called I Am That. I do have that book somewhere in this
Yeah.
mess of a library here. The I am that you had mentioned these words that like quoted from the book that I am not a person. And in my exploration as a philosopher myself, that I have thought of person as speaking to persona and identity, and this seems to be the obstacles and the obstructions that a that the actualization of soul uh, comes up against in their lives. And then I also, so to have a good understanding of this, the unividualism, this is unified or unity of the individual, is that correct?
Uh, okay, so a whole lot of things to say to that. So
Sure.
just the word.
Yeah.
So I'm suggesting, look, there's a state of coming into communion, not union, but communion.
Okay.
So in the sense of with union,
With yeah.
so that I don't think it's. I don't. It's not for me. It's no longer the idea that Tim's going to dissolve and there'll be no self and all of that, but actually the opposite. That the self finds its next level of evolutionary fulfillment by recognizing that it is actually always in relationship with the whole, because it is an aspect of the whole, and that shifts you from being, this separate little individual skin bag, as Alan Watts used to call it, to actually being something which is in relationship. And the whole philosophy would be, well, everything's relational. This is the one in relationship to itself as everything. But I would no longer say that the persona, or there's a persona which is in the way of the soul, which is something different, realizing itself. All of that's gone for me now. The way I would see it, I'm going to have to put some other ideas in place, if that's all right, Travis.
Yeah.
I would say, look, start from what is this? And I'm going to go very fast, and forgive me, but I'll do my best. When I look at this, what strikes me is that I'm in a process. That's the first thing. The universe is a process, and it's a process of forming, where there's always something new, always something new, always something new. So that form is forming, and the new thing is a creative version of what's gone before, so that there's continual novelty, but there's always includes the past. And so what I'm exploring is that the universe, that's what existence is. Existence is the process of forming. And the simplicity of the ontological vision is maybe everything that has any form whatsoever, whether you're talking about you and me or the number three, anything is part of one process of emergent forming, which has taken us from the simplest thing you can possibly imagine, the simplest piece of information, right the way through to this, over this 14 billion years, whatever. Well, I want to add something to that. The next thing I want to add is what is formed, the past, hasn't gone anywhere. So we have this idea that the past has passed. I don't think the past has passed. I think the past accumulates. There's just more and more of it. And it's all implicit in this moment. Implicit in this moment is all of our LinkedIn conversations, every book that I've written, all the things you've done in your life, all the way back. And so what you've got there is a very clear and simple theory of identity, because it goes, well, what am I? Well, I'm this psychobiological thing, system, in relationship with the whole. I'm arising from the whole, and I'm in relationship with it. And what am I? Well, I'm the past of all of that. You're meeting everything that Tim's ever been, and I'm meeting anything that Travis has ever been. So there's no separate soul thing or separate persona thing. I'm all of that. The soul, or the psyche, that's what the word means, the same word, psyche, is the most emergent aspect of me. I'm not just a biological thing. I'm also this non-material level of soul or psyche. That's also what I am, and so are you. And we're relating primarily on that level right now, in fact. Biologically, I'm just making funny noises. But you're hearing meaning, because all of that's happening on the non-material level of soul. And there's nothing particular that's the enemy in that. There will be lots of things in Tim which stop him moving forward. and there'll be other things which takes him forward, but there is no separate soul, separate persona. It's all one thing, one system, which is Tim, in this process of evolution.
Yeah, I think that when it seems like it's probably very much influenced by psychological and psychotherapy sort of therapeutic terms that kind of is continuing to divide. And I've been a big advocate for refraining from words and language that continues to divide. But when I think of a person that is maybe not walking in this unividualism, a person that is just living their lives in a very basic way, and some that they're what they're coming up against as a part of like not having been awakened to some of the next step in their awakening is they are kept from that because of things like persona, like the and I will define persona as a mask of personality. And so then that has a question of like these psychological dimensions that are distinct and not separate, was something that Roberto Assagioli used to describe certain things that I think is beautiful. And he gives an invitation for future generations or whatever to continue to kind of evolve his concept, which is really wise, forward thinking of him, but distinct and not separate. So I think the soul, distinct and not separate from the psychology, and distinct and not separate from the physiology. So the psychology being the persona, the personality at times, and how much can that veil be?
What do you mean by the soul, Travis?
What I mean by the soul is more the connection to the collective ongoing form in process, rather than kind of like several degrees different. So maybe the physiology and a lot of conventional science is bogged down by materialism and reduces things to materialism, reduces things to it must be empirical through matter, and it must be we must be aware of it through our sensory experience, otherwise it is not real and does not exist. But then at another level, there is great works and writings and things on psychological dynamics in relationships and relationship with
You were
yourself, relationship with
contrasting.
others.
Sorry, Travis.
Yeah.
I need to understand what you're saying. You're contrasting the persona, which I think I got what you mean by that,
Yep.
with the soul as separate, distinct but not separate. Very
Correct.
good. Nice phrase.
Yeah.
What's the difference in the way that you're using the words between what you mean by soul? Because both persona and soul are both non-material. They're not.
Yep.
I can't see your, any of that.
Right.
That's not available to the senses. What's the difference between what you mean by soul and what you mean by persona?
Then soul is the like the form in process. So the soul is in some way more deeply in relationship to what could be as well. So it's also like your highest expression is soul. Your limited expression is maybe not soul, but maybe more in the mud of persona at times. But as we are having conversations like this or other learnings and experiences in our lives, that gives us this sense of waking up, and we wake up to rise out of kind of like the stickiness of persona, of personality, of ego.
So I think, thank you for explaining that, because I think there's not a huge difference
That's just
between
how I
what
see
would
it.
say. Yeah, yeah,
Also,
of course. And that's what we're here to do, share how
yeah,
we see it. And
yeah,
hopefully we'll both end up a little bit wiser by the end of the conversation. I do hope so.
yeah.
It'd be fun. So for me, where I've ended up is not that dissimilar, maybe very similar actually,
Yeah.
of going, look, I'd want to add that this process of the accumulation of the past isn't passive, that it's the past is actually conditioning what is possible in the future. And it's the name I've given that to try and capture the concept was passivity, because it sounded like gravity. It was a natural thing that was making everything happen. One of the great, if you go down the road I've been going down of going, is everything that has form part of one process? You're left with, well, what about the laws of nature? I mean, that's a great problem for science generally. Like, what are they? Where do they exist? And what I'm suggesting is that the universe is more like a learning AI in that respect. It's learning how to be everything. And so the past accumulates and forms, I don't know, if you want, you can use the word algorithms or whatever you want, laws, habits, which govern how everything behaves. So not just, you can hear in my voice the habits of the way I form vowels because of where I live, different to you. And I have the habits of thought with the ideas that I've accumulated. But right back to the way that matter is behaving, the way my body behaves, everything is part of that one process. So then if I come to Tim, and especially his psychology, then it feels like, there is that process of emergence has meant that there's many levels to Tim. And one of the one of the lovely things about an evolutionary picture, which is so exciting, is it enables me to not be surprised by all the different things that are in Tim, going right the way back to animal survival. It's all in there. And the more emergent levels, which I think is what you probably mean by soul, or that would be maybe an equivalent, would be the part of the system which has reached further and further into possibility, and so that seems very similar. I think the thing which I'm wary of, and you haven't done this, but I'm just wary of it for people listening, is that often when people talk about ego or personas and things like this, there is an undercurrent of negativity to it, which I don't think is warranted. So when I worked with, for those with the Italian gentleman you mentioned, years and years ago in my 20s, not with him personally, but with his work, I was aware of these different personas in me, and I could see how they conflicted and how they needed to all come into an arrangement, and it was very positive. Because it feels like, look, you wouldn't want to be without your personas. When you started off this conversation, you jumped into a persona and projected it beautifully to the camera to create an excited atmosphere for us all to go, right, let's go. It was great. It was lovely. And that's appropriate. And I'm not being the same with you as I might be with one of my kids or my wife. And that's appropriate. The problem is, or it's no problem, it's just simply, are we able to keep moving towards those more emergent levels of passivity, if you like? So that I'm learning how to be on this more emergent level. And the name of the Unividual is an attempt to go, yeah, maybe there's an emergent level in which you actually, your sense of who you are takes a flip, and you suddenly go, oh, I'm not actually separate from anything. And that is the insight that's being captured by these spiritual traditions for some time. But what's interesting about it is that to go down that road, you have to be able to go, but these past masters, whether they're, whoever they are, Rumi or Bodhidharma or whoever the hell you're talking about, it's not like they knew and we've forgotten. It's like, no, they didn't know and we've forgotten. They discovered what they could discover, and then they articulated with the ideas that they had, which were a development of the ideas that they picked up from the past. And they moved it forward for us. But they did their best to describe something. We now need to do our best to describe it and then pass it on to the next generation to carry on that process. And part of that is, for me, a kind of Copernican shift, which goes, look, not there's the perfect thing, it's all consciousness, we've fallen into this, any of that. But actually this much more optimistic evolutionary picture, which is we've come from simplicity through information to physics to biology to soul or psyche to, well, for me, the real Copernican shift is going. What I experienced when I was 12, at that time I would have called God. That there was something greater than me that was all loving, which was totally benign, and that I was being held in it, and it was like extraordinary, the love. And that's been a thread I was following for a long time. Not in a Christian sense necessarily, although sometimes. But there's serious problems with that idea. Eventually made me leave it behind. And they're the classic problems for me of the world doesn't look like it's been made by an intelligent, loving God, because it's just full of the most banal, awful, awful suffering, which is hard to find a philosophical way around, even though people try. And so this God doesn't seem very loving, which is my experience of it. And he's certainly not very smart, because we've had 5 complete extinctions. So he's a cruel idiot. If there's a God at the beginning creating this, he's a cruel idiot. And that's not my experience. So what that's led me to, which is something which has really caught my imagination, is that maybe that experience we're having of something bigger than us is not at the beginning, but it's actually where we're going, or it's the latest, it's the emergent edge of everything. And that when we come into communion, we form something greater than ourselves. And the metaphor for that works for me is, at a certain point, it took a long, long time for single cells to work out how to come into communion with each other and form something greater than themselves. And now, look, there's you and me. Amazing. Trillions of cells all cooperating. And that the same thing is happening with the psyche or the soul. That the psyche or the soul is coming into communion and forming a super system, just like it's happened before, again and again and again. And that super system is what we touch when we come into these deep awake states, and it feels like incredible. It feels like this enormous love, and because it's the leading edge of the emergent process. Though I'll add one more thing just to that, which because it will make sense of the earlier things, which is what that says to me is that it's not the way that it has been seen in the past, 2,500 years ago in India, which is, in order to touch that, you need to get rid of your individuality. It's the opposite. What you bring to it is your individuality. Because, what's the difference between Tim and a slime mold? A slime mold, all the cells are the same. They're a collective, but they're not a communion into an autonomous system. And it's the difference of all these cells. It's that they're all doing something different that makes Tim a biological super system. And my sense is that's what's happening on the next level up. That's what I mean by the unividual communion. I think it's what would have been called God, which is another level of communion, but a communion of souls and or psyches. And that what we bring to that is our uniqueness. That's why our individuality is so important. And that will include all of the aspects that have got us there. But we have to be able to manage that and to nurture the most emergent level of passivity of our psyche to get us to that place.
Yeah, I love that so much to respond to the essence or the responsibility of us to articulate essence of this existence and stuff is beautiful. And what an awesome life that you and I have been able to find ourselves in this journey with these interests and been now making lives out of articulating the essence of experience and existence, and to help heal others and things like that is really beautiful. And the idea of the individual is really profound for me. Even earlier when you were speaking about this, I was thinking about where you're located in the world, and I was thinking like the more the Eastern wisdom, right? The Eastern sort of already had been informed in some way, in a collective way. They're more family oriented. They're more community oriented, and that's why a lot of the spiritual traditions from India and the Asian countries have brought with them value of community with them, this collectiveness with them. And then the more that you move west, it gets more individualized. So much so that when you get into America, I'm in the west coast of America, so I'm in California. You're in the UK. So the more that you get into the west, the more individualized it becomes in when you look at it from like a societal, a sociological perspective, this individuality is sort of, it's shamed and sort of not really. I think what you were just speaking about, and what I agree with, is that this individuality is a little bit more. It's more pure than what the sociological criticisms that are often created. Like if when I travel, I've had the opportunity to travel some different countries. When I travel to another country, people from the UK or these other, they love to say how much they don't like Americans. They love to speak about that, and that is coming from this sort of like looking down upon the individualism of capitalistic nature that is involved in the West. But there is some really important diving into this idea that the transformation of the individual informs the transformation of the whole.
Yeah,
That's what
that's
I
it.
think.
That's it.
The transformation of this individual thing becoming more unified, more in communion,
Yeah.
that individual thing then is adding some valuable past layering, as you were speaking about this, the past being, folded upon each other and layered in every moment, that it is adding something of value if the individual can be an
Yes.
individual. And then you had that. This is also making me think about how you were speaking of the ways that you're correct there. At the beginning of this conversation, there is something that I am putting on to kind of set the space. Great morning, great afternoon, great evening, wherever this conversation. I'm doing this as a setting of the space. It has a lot of different strategic reasons. It has some entertainment value. It's letting people know who's speaking, letting people know what the show is, letting people know who the guest is, and then we can begin the conversation. It sets a stage, so
Yep.
that it sets context for the conversation, which is important. And
Yep.
then for you as a father, maybe to your wife or to your children or to students of yours or to myself, there's different kind of angles and different facets of your personality and experience and your soul that is turning these different facets of a gem to observe and connect with that person. But I think for some people, those different facets, they get stuck there. Maybe it's
Hmm.
a cloudier gem, or there different metaphorical ways to kind of speak about that, but they get stuck in a persona that they can't get out of, and maybe they're trapped in it themselves, and then there's a lot of internal conflict that can be created from that, a lot of dysfunctional, uncomfortable experience in their human experience with the past, and then they're depressed, and then the unfolding of the future, and then they're anxious, and all of these things, and they're never really present, and you would have to be present in order to be able to maneuver through those different facets in a more seamless way. And it would be nice if my authentic soul expression, I think in a very similar way that you're speaking about soul, in my authentic soul expression, if it can really be shining forth through all of those masks as much as is possible, as much as the different facets rather are a vehicle for ideas and communication and things like this as we interact with other aspects of this human experience, of this universal experience. but as long as much of me can shine through and be really authentic, maybe unapologetic, lots of different ways to describe the characteristics, and a lot of those characteristics are the descriptors that are given to people that are maybe enlightened or awake or individualized or unividualized. And so yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think one of the things which complicates it is, in my experience of having to deal with Tim and all of his complexity for 60 something years, is that also that, in our personas or personality, often our greatest qualities and our foibles are the same thing. And, so that it's easy for someone who's smart to become overly intellectual. It's easy for someone who's a good leader to become dominant. It's so easy for someone who's easygoing to become a doormat, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we're negotiating constantly, I think, is how can we bring all of those together, what Jung called the individuation. How can we individuate? But going back to the earlier things you said, which I think are really important, I just apologize for all English people who are just jealous. You understand that, don't you? We used to run the world, but now you do. It's a hard thing. The individual, it's like there are problems. If we become isolated individuals, that's been one of the problems. If we become narcissistic individuals, the egotism is a real problem, which is it's about me, that's it. All of that stuff. Those are real problems, and they've undoubtedly increased. And the whole thing we've got about celebrity culture and all of that, all the things you can point to, loneliness, breakdown of the family. And that's the dark side of what's been achieved. And what's been achieved is a level of individuality that our ancestors would not have dreamt of, because nearly all of them just simply lived in collectives, where the culture, everyone in the culture, we talk about, on the internet, don't we, about bubbles that you get stuck in a bubble. That's what a culture is, to the point where people actually speak a different language to their neighbors. They can't even talk to them. That's our history. And we've broken out from that, and people have individuated. And so the movement that's happened more and more and more over the last few hundred years in the West in particular has been a movement whereby people have questioned their own culture. And that's been great and really moved us on. And we've started to go, what happens if we treat everyone as an individual, not by what they look like or where they come from or anything, just as an individual, sex they are. Let's treat them like they're just them, all of which has been very positive. But so how do you keep all of that positivity and deal with this negativity, the negative side of the individual? And the danger, I think, is that we think the only solution is to retreat into some sort of collectivism. We need to go back to, we're all like this together, and we're in opposition to those who are not. And that retreat into collectivism, I think, is a massive mistake. I think we need to go forward into, everything's one. I am one with everyone. And the enormous love and benevolence that comes from that recognition is life transforming. And that's what I mean by the unividual. That we move forward into a place where you go, no. The great thing about Travis is he's the only one. It's like, how amazing. And we live in a world where there's actually room for Travis to be increasingly what Travis is. And then Travis gets to bring that to the collective. And if Travis recognizes, which I've got a sneaking suspicion he does, that actually he's one with everyone else, then his aim is no longer narcissistic, egotistical, and he doesn't have a narrow sense of partisan benevolence, if you like. There's a universal benevolence, so that you want to serve as best as you can the whole. But you also realize that you're an individual, so your responsibility is to where you can respond. And where you can respond is where you interact with the universe, with everything you do and everything you know. And that's where you bring that kindness or benevolence. Or
Right.
wisdom
And whether it's Tim or Travis or Ryan or Heather or Melissa or any of these people, any of this audience members that are watching this right now, there's for me, I think maybe you would agree, is that the more that I'm focusing on my transformation and my continuing to forwardly progress into the world in this individual, like actualizing my individuality in the many different ways that I can do that, the more that I am capable of serving this greater whole thing, this greater collective thing. And ultimately we are all trying to find ways to serve something outside of ourselves, even if it doesn't seem as though we are, like even a the deepest, darkest, narcissistic, egotist sort of person is still in some way trying to serve, even as selfish as their desires could be or their actions could be, in some way is serving a whole thing. And it could be, even in these kind of spiritual philosophy terms, it could be that his or her serving themselves is just a serving of one facet of something that is connected to everything anyway. And so it's just doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It just doesn't realize that it just has forgotten, or is asleep, or somnambulist, sleepwalking through this idea that it isn't connected to the whole thing. It's so beautiful.
One of the things that I again love about this idea that this is one emergent process that we're in is it enables me to have an understanding, and from it more patience with not only the things inside myself, which I have become more patient with slowly over the years, but also the things in the world. Because it's like I have to live with all of the levels of evolution. I have to live with physics. You know, I drop something on my foot, it will fall and it will hurt. Oh, that's biology. I have to live with that. It will hurt. I have to live with the fact that not everyone has been as lucky as I am to experience God, let's call it, the old-fashioned word. And that changes things. And not everyone who's had that experience has been lucky enough to be able to live at a time in a culture where you can question how you understand it, all the things that I've benefited from. So, you know, there's people who are obviously still living in the Middle Ages, and you run up against them and it's hard. There's people who are living with, you know, I represent this and all of, and those I closed, all of that's happening. And so that's what we have to deal with. And it feels to me like one of the things, let me tell you about this, and you may have done these sort of things before, but about 20 years ago, I part of what I do, up until quite recently, probably the main thing I do, is about trying to give people an experience of communion in the oneness of things, and that to feel that enormous, that big love. That's been my main focus. And I've been doing these retreats literally all over the world, in all these different cultures, and they're so different. But everywhere's the same in this respect, although getting them there is maybe different. And the secret that I found was that, yeah, we can meditate, and that's all very powerful, and it's about changing your focus, and I do a lot of that. But the most powerful thing was to get people to connect and commune with each other. And I started developing a lot of different techniques for connecting people, the simplest of which is what we're doing now, looking at each other. And, you know, it's amazing to me we can do it now even over on the internet. And to just get people and just sat in front of each other and going, look, there's a person, and there's a body. But what you're connecting with is not just that. You're connecting with a psyche, a soul that's looking back at you. You just can't see it, but you know it's there. And you can commune with it. And we'll do a thing. We're doing a retreat. We're only going to do one this year in September in the UK. And what it leads to is a thing where you will connect with everyone in this small group, say 24 people, in this deep way for 3 minutes, let's say, in a beautiful environment. And that's all it takes. So it lasts maybe an hour and a quarter, something like that. But I would say, I want to say everyone, that sounds a bit ridiculous, so I'll say nearly everyone will have an experience of deep communion without, will come out and just go, oh my God, They might go into it going, "Ooh, this sounds a bit weird," but they will come out of it going, "I can't believe what just happened." And that is all they've done is look at people, but done it in this way, and made that connection. They've entered the communion of souls. So it's no longer like, "Oh, that's an interesting idea that Tim has, that we all come into a communion of souls." It's like, no, come into the communion of souls and you will feel it. You will know it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now, or in the past years, is holding experiences, facilitating this. What I would call it would be transegoic gnosis, a knowing of the transegoic state and being. And some of the things that you said earlier is that there's a lot of suffering in the world, and that entity, that God that we are all a part of, in, through, and around us, is sort of content with anything that happens. It's just like, my house could burn down right now, and God is still just sort of content, and kind of allows that to be a synchronous moment for some further unfolding, as time goes on and as my human experience goes on. So it's really fascinating that somebody can be awakened to this contentment and peace and things like this. I think the further progression right now, I'm doing my doctoral study, and so my first language is American Sign Language. My mother is deaf, my grandmother and grandfather are deaf as well, and I'm making meditation accessible, a transegoic gnosis meditation accessible to a population of deaf students. So
Wow,
yeah,
fantastic. That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, very cool. Thank you. So I'm facilitating this experience with deaf people in a way that they have to move through the journey themselves and arrive at that place. Some of them will arrive at that place very quickly, maybe in the first session. Usually everyone is doing 3 sessions, and maybe they don't always completely arrive, but there's some challenges when you're trying to do it yourself, and things like this. If this is their first experience with meditation, things like this is important. But I think the further progression of this is still something to do with the unwinding of our entanglement with narrative. I had heard you speak about narrative and narrativity, and I would love for us to speak about that a little bit. What I am seeing, I'm looking at some of the scholars that have been researching enlightenment, some really beautiful scholars that I work with. One of them, his name is Jeffrey Martin, Dr. Jeffrey Martin. I've mentioned him on the podcast before, because this is informed by transpersonal psychology. We're always looking at the further edges of states of being, and so I bring up his work a lot. But he calls it persistent non-symbolic experience. So this awakening experience, or this maybe unividuality, is a being. Whether he would agree or not agree with unividuality, I'm not sure. I think he does not agree with some of the things that I like. There are different, very intellectual criticisms to make back and forth, which makes this so much fun. Makes it so great. He is a great human being. Really like this guy. But he's speaking about persistent non-symbolic experience. So the idea is that we are persisting in an experience that is dropped of self-narrative, that it is no longer required, and it is dissolved to different degrees as well. There's different. He uses locations as a way to describe the different levels of awakened beingness in the world. Like he might describe Eckhart Tolle at a certain location, or some of these other great teachers at certain locations. But there's still there's this still I don't quite agree with that, because it seems like it takes away any value from narrative. And I think narrative is important. I think it is valuable. Symbols and mythology, these things for me are informative and valuable in the ways that we are, articulating our own narratives, and being a part of participating in the narrativity, as a word that you've used, so that this is like serving us. Just like ego doesn't have to be a bad thing, it can serve us, and it's serving our way of communicating with each other, it's serving us as a vehicle. So this importance of narrative, I think it is important. And some scholars of enlightenment are saying that it should be no narrative. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I obviously don't know this gentleman and what he said, so
Sure.
I'm not going to be. It's not. But from what from the, obviously you haven't talked very long about it, so I have
Yeah,
just the beginnings of an idea.
absolutely.
But it sounds like a very common idea, or a version of a very common, a very old idea, which I think is entirely wrong.
Yeah, it's
And
like that dissolving into the
yeah,
collective,
I
right?
think it's a misunderstanding of the nature of consciousness, and I think it's a misunderstanding of the nature of how we experience things. And so one of the so again, I'll try and be very quick, because these are obviously big ideas all nested in each other. But what the big shift for me has been a shift away from the traditional ideas, particularly in the East, that there is a thing called consciousness, and it's a kind of like a presence of something pure consciousness. I think that's a reification. I don't. It's the making. It's been made up. I don't think it exists. I think if you see it like that, you will experience it as if that's true, and that's a key. The key is the way in which you conceptualize things will govern what you experience. The problem in an awful lot of spirituality is that people think they're not doing it. They think they're not conceptualizing it, because one of their concepts is, I don't have concepts, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get caught in this loop where they're having this experience of, I'm pure conscious. I can go into it now because I've done it for so many years. It's like, there we are. It's like, I can see it like that and experience it like that. But the mistake is to think that means it's true. Because if you talk to most people and you went, do you live in an objective world? And they go, yeah. Why? Well, I'm experiencing it. And if you spoke to people in spirituality, does it all exist in consciousness? They go, yeah. Why? Well, I'm experiencing it. And what that can tell you is, how you conceptualize things. What does that even mean? It just means, how are you categorizing your experience? And if you can't say it is this, not that, you can't say it's that experience. I can only say I experience oneness if I can say, well, it's not this experience of everything separate. So everything needs to be categorized, otherwise you wouldn't know what it was. And that's not a negative thing. Now, put that together with a different theory. So if consciousness isn't this pure ephemeral something floating around, whatever I used to think it was, which doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever anymore. It just sounds crazy idea. But there we go. I've changed. To me, it now feels like, look, what do I actually experience? What I experience is, I'm taking in loads and loads of information unconsciously all the time, even asleep, hence the reason the alarm clock wakes me up. But what I'm conscious of is what I focus on. So right now I'm focusing on you, I'm conscious of you. I'm now going to focus on my left foot. I bet you weren't conscious of your left foot before, but you probably are now. And I certainly wasn't, but I am now, and I'm going to move it to outside the window. It's like wherever, it's not just where I look, it's wherever I put my attention, bang. So it looks to me like consciousness is that every system, if this is the one in relationship to itself, every single system, from the most basic system, is in some way taking in information. We're doing it on a very complex level. Some of it really matters, most of it doesn't. So we focus on what really matters and we process that in high definition, if you will. That's what consciousness is. So what's happening with these mystical states is not somehow no concepts or no self. It's simply that somebody has learned, and it's interesting, very powerful thing, to put their attention somewhere else. But that doesn't mean the self has disappeared, which is why when you come back, it's still there. Or there's no time. It just means that during that moment where you took your attention somewhere else, You processed that. You were immersed in God. It was all just light. Let's go for an extreme. Yeah, I had that. And then I came back and went, fuck, that was 20 minutes or whatever it was. And there was Tim. And that wasn't like, oh, God, I've got back. And Tim didn't really dissolve any more than, tonight when I go to sleep, if I dream, I'll be off in another world altogether. But if I came back from that and went, yeah, I had a no Tim experience. It was like, no, you didn't. You just went to sleep and you paid attention to something else. You are still Tim. You are still this one evolving system, which is in relationship with the whole. And that shifts it then. It really shifts it. So I think, for me, a lot of those people who are like, oh, this person's on this level, and I think they're all part of the thing which needs to change. I think they're part of the past. And I'm sure they're very nice people, a lot of them, and and they're helping people and wonderful. But in terms of really getting what this is, I think it's just a repetition of ideas which really the rest of culture has moved on significantly in these areas, and spirituality is just way behind, clinging to old psychology, and it needs to up its game.
Yeah. So some of these are the same criticisms that are made of Ken Wilber's work. And he sort of has these very hierarchical structures and ideas for how somebody is awakened or not, and it seems like his way is the only way, and which is problematic. I've had some wonderful scholars on the podcast. One of them being Jorge Frere, who has this participatory theory with it all, that there's not just one way to wake up, but there's many ways to wake up. And
what have
many
you added
different
to that,
ways.
Travis? Sorry to interrupt you. That feels
No,
like
no.
an exciting thought, and a really interesting thinker is that as is Ken, of course, to give him his due. I mean, so is Ken. But what about if it's not like, and I'm not sure if Foray would say this or not, you can tell me, but not like, well, there's awakening and there's many ways to get there, but actually we're actually in a genuinely creative evolutionary process. So by the time you're in my ripe old age, who knows what it will be for you? Mm-hmm. It may be something I can't even dream of, because this is what it is for me. Not, well, there's somewhere we've got to get back to. It's already there. It's where we've fallen from. It's what the Buddha had and we haven't got it. And if we could just get rid of this illusion. None of that. But one creative process of forming, and it will be creative. And what we're talking about with awakening is, there's a very emergent level of this whereby you recognize things which most people don't see. Yeah. And if you focus on it, it's really, really interesting and beautiful. And that, do you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, absolutely. And very much so the idea of the participatory is creative. And Jorge Frere was like a big criticizer of Wilber's work academically in these circles. So definitely creative. Could you also, I like this idea that I could also be, very much a part of, maybe more so than is realized. And I think that you're saying some of these things is like that I could possibly be a part of what it all means. I can be intentional, and my unique expression can be a significant informing body of what this transpires into in the next 30 years, into how it means and things like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, we, as far as we know, and in this little corner of this huge universe, we're it. And, and with all of the other of life, not separate from life, obviously. But the latest thing is the psyche. That's the thing where it's all been leading to. And then if what I'm speculating about has any reality to it, which I think it does, which is the psyches are coming together to form a super psyche, something which is greater still, which we experience as that enormous unividual. It's the individuals in a state of unity. And so we're part of that. I'm working on this crazy project, Travis, which I've been It's been 8 years, 8 years more really, since my last book. And I thought I'd finished with the last book. I thought, that's it, I've done now. And then there's been these 8 intense years every day. And to lead to a project, which I'm going to put out, I think this year, it'll be on YouTube primarily. I'll do it as audio and I'll just give it away. It's going to be about 40 hours, I think, of audio. And about all of these ideas, really deep going into a different vision of what life is, existence is, and what spirituality is. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to call it, I think, well, this is the title at the moment, which I like, is to call it just simply Why Your Life Really Matters. Because that, I think, is the underlying thing that motivates me. It's like, look, we're alive, and it matters. It's something. It's not that reductionist, oh, well, it's, just you're here for a couple of seconds on this planet in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, what the hell? And then you're gone. It's like, not that. But neither, oh, you need to get back to the great thing, or, oh, you've fallen into illusion. None of that. But actually something utterly beautiful and creative of which every single person is a part and every single person is contributing as we evolve. And we're doing it right now. We're creating ourselves right now.
I love that title. Why do we really matter? And that's really great. That when you the moment that you said, and we are it, in the last little speech, like it makes me emotional in this moment. I'm like, isn't this so awesome? This is so cool. We're at an hour now, and I don't want to overuse your time. There were so many other things that I would have loved to ask and explore with you, and I'm sure we could just continue to do this for many hours and eons to go. I'd love to share with my audience moving forward these things that you're creating and the things that you have created. I'll leave links in the description, so check that out. You have a really great YouTube channel, 10,000 subscribers, so your ongoing conversations with your community in that way, and books that you've authored, published, why we really matter. Can't wait till this is fully flourishing and out there as well. I'd love to have you on again. I think I can say that we're friends, and I really I appreciate having you as a friend and brother just on this path, on this journey, and I'm so inspired and feel so great about this conversation. So thank you so much, Tim Freke.
It's been a real pleasure. It's been a delight to meet you, Travis.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right.
You're thinking, who is this man talking to?